So what's the truth about Hispanic and Black Americans on immigration policy? How do they really vote? How do they feel about immigration reform? Hi, I'm Dan Stein, president of FAIR. You can subscribe to our content by clicking the subscribe button on this YouTube channel to get all of great content from FAIR from now moving forward. Hi, Dan Stein, joined by Ira Mehlman, who's FAIR's media relations director. We've got a brand new exit poll that we took with Zogby, and it's got some interesting results I think you'll find revelatory. For many, many years, Republicans have said, well, we can't object to amnesty. We can't be too tough on immigration because, after all, Hispanic voters won't vote for us. Well, we all know right now in this election, once again, the shibboleth was shredded. This whole idea that you can't get Hispanic voters by talking tough on immigration is wrong. And here to give us the highlights of this poll, Ira, take it away.
Thanks. Well, as you pointed out, let's start with the Hispanic voters since you brought those up. What we have known for a long time, and it's not just this poll that shows it, but many, many other polls, is that Hispanics vote for the same reason that everybody else does. They vote on the bread and butter issues, their jobs, their children's education, healthcare, things like that. And once again, especially with the COVID-19 crisis, the national health emergency, and the resulting economic crisis, they looked at those issues as the biggest issues. And as we saw in places like South Florida and South Texas, in spite of the fact that Donald Trump lost the presidential election, Republicans actually did pretty well and picked up seats in Congress and picked up seats in state legislatures. So, if the Republicans are looking ahead, now that they're going to be out of the White House, what is going to appeal to Hispanic voters, it is not going to be to simply throw open the borders. In fact, quite the opposite. Given the circumstances that we find ourselves in now, that's the last thing that most Hispanic voters, and most other voters as well, want to see the federal government be doing right now.
So this whole argument all through the campaign that Trump's rhetoric about the borders, about Mexico, about immigration generally was going to turn off Hispanic voters. Was that true or not?
No, absolutely not. And, we have the polling results and it's on our website. People can find it there. I was just reading an article this morning in City Journal, which is put out by the Manhattan Institute, a very reliable organization. They said the same thing. So, Republicans have to understand, like everybody else, that they have to dissect what happened in this last election, recognize what was done right, what was not done right, looking at the personalities of the candidates that they ran. These are the things they ought to be looking at, not looking at throwing open the borders, because that is the last thing the country needs right now. It is the last thing that tens of millions of unemployed Americans need right now, and it's not going to help them in upcoming elections. So they sort of have a roadmap. Whether they're smart enough to follow it or not, we'll find out.
Oh, so with the COVID lockdown emerging again and more states starting to shut down, a lot of voters feel from this exit poll about continuing or accelerating immigration during the COVID pandemic.
It is overwhelming. It is like, 80 and 90% range of people. And this cuts across all political, ideological, and ethnic lines in this country. They think it's a good idea to keep the borders closed right now. And in fact, even after the pandemic, you have substantial majorities in the 60+% range that think we ought to contain reduced immigration. One of the ironies here is, as President-elect Biden's plans for the pandemic are starting to emerge, including possibly a lengthy lockdown of Americans, you have this irony here where we're all going to be locked in our houses, but the idea is to throw open the borders. That makes even less sense. So, we can only hope that once he assumes the mantle of office, once he's sitting in that office and the responsibility is on his shoulders, that he will recognize that not only is this bad politics, but it's bad policy, and he will do what the people elected him to do.
Well, is it fair to say from the exit poll that the people who supported Biden do support his throwing open the border concept?
When we ask the question just sort of generally, what Americans believe, we see that it just in the abstract, Americans want to see the borders remain secure. They are not looking for a massive influx of new people at this time, and they also want a continued cessation or at least abatement of immigration going into the future. When you start getting into the politics of it, when you start attaching it to particular candidates' names, things begin to change a little bit, but that's a reflection of how polarizing these past few years have been. But if you look at it in the abstract, if you ask people, do you think it's a good idea to allow lots of people in amid a global pandemic? The answer is clearly no, for obvious reasons. If you ask people, should we maintain lower levels in the coming years so that we don't have massive population growth, we don't have lots of people coming in competing for jobs as our economy recovers, then the answer, of course, is no. Once you start getting into the partisan politics, people tend to, we see a lot of tribalization, political tribalization. But in the abstract, most Americans agree that we should not be doing these crazy things.
So where can I get these poll results if I want to look at them more closely?
Well, people can go to our website, fairus.org. It's probably right there on the homepage with links to both the crosstabs and the general results.
Some of the most important exit poll results on immigration can be found on our website, fairus.org. Now we're going to be joining Shari Rendall, who's FAIR's Director of State and Local Outreach. And welcome, Shari.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to see you.
Okay, well, we're going to take a look at the down ballot issues, state legislative races. And, even though it got kind of dicey for President Trump, it looks like there were a lot of interesting things that happened at the state legislative level, including things that have a lot of implications for the future of immigration reform at the state level. And if, in fact, the Biden administration starts to take the wheels off the train here, state legislative vehicles are going to be a major issue coming up in the next administration. So, Shari, what's the key takeaway from this election?
Well, the key takeaway is that the Democrats really failed to materialize their blue wave, which was anticipated by all of the pollsters and the media prior to the elections. And they didn't succeed in picking up any additional legislative chambers during the 2020 elections. What we saw was back in 2019, they picked up the Virginia legislature. It flipped from Republican to Democrat, and they were excited about those results and thought that they could, in 2020, target a lot of legislatures and have them flip. And they figured, since there was some gridlock in DC, that the state legislatures would be a good opportunity to move their immigration policies. And they decided to fundraise and dumped millions into those state legislative races. Interestingly enough, is they targeted 9 specific legislative chambers and spent over $32 million. They had the fundraising edge during the 2020 elections. As you know, Soros and others are quite able to fund these Democrat priorities, and we see them doing that across the state and local levels.
Well, what would you say the big reason for their failure would be?
I think the big reason for their failure is that the legislatures have been really strong, and the American people don't want the priorities that the Democrats, especially those progressive Democrats, open border Democrats, are pushing. And what we're seeing is states like Michigan, Iowa, North Carolina, Texas, and others in the House, they were able to hold their House seats. And in the Senate, which Minnesota only controlled, the Republicans only controlled narrowly, they held, as well as Pennsylvania. So you see a lot of these states that were in play during the presidency not impacted on the local and state levels.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So in terms of immigration policy at the state level, are there any more states now that look like good candidates for state legislative activity in 2021?
Well, we are very pleased with how the elections went. There was one legislative chamber that went from Democrat to Republican. That was New Hampshire. That was the only other legislature that flipped during the cycle. And we count Virginia flipping and then New Hampshire. And already we have seen with the new trifecta in New Hampshire, state legislators are looking to push policies that protect their citizens, ensure their safety and their national security. And the other one, just quickly, is Montana. Montana had a Republican legislature and a Democrat governor. This was the only governor's race that flipped out of 11 and went Republican. The rest of the gubernatorial races all remained with the incumbents.
So we had a big victory in Gary, Indiana, when the sanctuary ordinance there was overturned as a result of state legislation that we worked on previously in Indiana. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. And we had early supporting FAIR's efforts in the litigation, and it was a great victory. Good to see. And we hope to follow that up in other places as well. Just to kind of go back to the state legislatures, I would like to say it's interesting to note that 3/4 of the state legislatures and governors are controlled by one party. Mm-hmm. And right now, Republicans have 23 trifectas to the Democrats' 15. That's where the same party controls all three. There is only one legislature that remains divided between the House and the Senate, and that is Minnesota. So I think what we're going to see over the next little bit is the states where there are one party, like California, they're going to go bluer, and states where it's more conservative, like Florida and others, they're going to go redder. We're going to see more of that over the next little bit.
How did Republicans become reds and Democrats become blues?
I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure. Ira, do you know anything on that?
It seems like the Democrats are becoming redder.
It was just one of those things that the election results, the TV stations put all the Republicans in red and all the Democratic states in blue. It was just a decision made in some TV control room, and that just took root.
Wow.
That actually is how we got the red and the blue.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. I think the good thing with, once we have seen the poll numbers that Ira shared with you earlier, I think there is an important role for the states to play and for our members to play. And they need to remind their state legislators that Americans don't want to throw open the borders, and they don't want to have policies that don't help American workers. They need to remind their legislators to keep those things in mind and to work towards policies that would reflect those priorities.
Well, it also seems like Americans are now fleeing those states that have been promoting and rewarding immigration, illegal in particular. California and New York stand out, is really in Illinois, as examples of where Americans are fleeing, going to other states. So now there are provisions in Biden's plan where he wants to give those states the right to petition their own immigrants to try to replace the taxpayers they're losing because of their own failed tax policies. That seems like a kind of stretch, given particularly the amount of income you have to earn in order to pay any income tax anymore in this country anyhow. It seems to me like we have a lot of opportunity here to be working at the state level on state level legislative activities over the next couple of years. So Shari, where can people go if they want to get involved with FAIR to be part of our activist network?
Well, they can go to fairus.org, and we actually have a place where they can sign up digitally, and we will reach back out to them. We have started already engaging people. Another thing they might want to visit is we did a legislative report card on the states and their activities, what types of bills were introduced and what the results were. And they might want to see that as well, and that's linked on the state pages.
All right, well, excellent job. Thanks for the updates. I'm Dan Stein. Thanks for joining us. And remember, we'll be back again with more great content.